Um, can I ask you first perhaps to introduce yourself each?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Lita Rubanova. I go by she, her, hers. I am the operations manager for Body Politic. I started in October with Body Politic as an events intern, and I've just picked up duties since. Around March, when both Sabrina and Fiona caught coronavirus, I stepped in to help sort of form the group and have been helping onboard moderators, moderating myself, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Lauren, do you want to go next?
So I'm Lauren Nichols. I had COVID. I was confirmed positive as of March 17th and tested positive twice. Was struggling for quite a bit for about 4 weeks. Didn't have a soul to talk to or good doctors. And then I had a friend send me an article that Fiona had written in the New York Times and saw that there was a support group, and was so happy that one existed because I desperately needed one for my own mental health, and got really onto the kind of advocacy train, trying to enlighten people. I was kind of doing that from day one because everything that I was seeing in the news just didn't resonate with my version of COVID that I was having. Yeah, so then eventually became a moderator just to help out because I'm so passionate about not having anyone else deal with that sort of isolation mindset completely, with their symptoms and not having someone to talk to. And outside of that, I work for the US government as a federal manager within the kind of defense logistics space. So that's my deal.
Thank you very much. Sabrina, do you want to go next?
Sure thing. Hi, I'm Sabrina, and I've known Fiona since college, and then about 2 years ago, Fiona started Body Politic in its original iteration, and I started helping out a lot more with that when we're doing events and programming. So we've been doing that for a while, and then when we both got sick together in early March in New York City, when there was still so much uncertainty and not a lot of access to information or testing or, much of a community at all. Fiona was really such a lifeline to me when I was sick and isolating and just looking for answers or support or really anything at all. Fiona was my main go-to and just really helped me so much on a personal level. So as we started, to recover and, just kind of even unrecovered yet, like get back on our feet and start to do work, we were just really inspired to try to bring that connection that we forged together, being sick together, to more people, because we just both found it so valuable. So we wanted to create a space where more people could find that. Outside of this, I work in TV development and production. So that's my background. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. Fiona, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my name is Fiona Lowenstein, and with Sabrina, I'm one of the co-founders of the group. As she mentioned, we got sick in the same week. We're actually pretty sure that Sabrina gave me the virus. And this was, in the week before anything had shut down in New York, when we still didn't have a lot of information about the virus. And we were also being kind of led to believe that young people, or people were 26, that people our age couldn't get severely sick from this illness. So I actually was hospitalized for coronavirus, which is a slightly different experience than a lot of the other admins and people in our group. But I wasn't on a ventilator and I wasn't in the ICU. So I think it's, it's debatable whether I don't think I had a mild case, but it obviously was not the most acute. And I started telling my story in the media pretty early. I'm a writer and producer and editor. And, as Sabrina mentioned, Body Politic initially was a publication and an event series in New York that examined the intersections of health and social justice. So as soon as we even started hearing about COVID in the news, we wanted to, provide support. And we were actually talking about creating online affinity groups, for different populations that might be affected. But once we both became sick, along with I think 2 or 3 other members of our kind of core Body Politic team. So very early on, it became clear that we would have to readjust what we were doing because our capacities were limited. And as Sabrina mentioned, we really found connection with each other. One thing that's a little unique about my story is that I shared my story in the media very early on when I'd first been discharged from the hospital and did not realize I was going to have this long recovery. And my story was kind of about being young and just getting this sick. And so I actually struggled with some isolation and mental health issues related to initially feeling like the story that was being told about me was not accurate to my experience. Because initially, yes, I was this 26-year-old who got hospitalized and thought I was going to recover quickly, but then it became clear that the recovery was much longer and the symptoms were lingering. And I think having the group really validated that experience, and it made me realize that, and we'll get into more of this later, but made me realize I wasn't alone. So the patient advocacy kind of grew from there, and I've been continuing to write and report on these issues as much as possible based on what I'm seeing in the group.
Thank you. And Gina, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Gina, and I got sick with COVID probably around March 19th, 20th. And, I got it from again, similar story, right before the lockdown happened. I was still, in smaller groups and tried to avoid people, but hung out with a friend who got sick. She was asymptomatic. She got sick the following day, and then I got sick 5 days later. Really, I had mild, and then it turned into a little bit more moderate, shortness of breath, kind of scary symptoms. We were told to stay home. So it felt very isolating, not knowing, I couldn't even get a test until 20 days later, and it came out negative, but pretty sure, I had the virus. I think that's another isolating part of it, is you're I'm 99 point, unless there's some other weird virus out there, I have this virus, and there's no confirmation that you get, which is makes it even harder. And then, my friends got better. The ones that got sick, her and her husband, and I was still sick, and I was like, what's going on? Why am I still sick? What's wrong with me? And I didn't know anybody else, because this was early on. Nobody else was getting sick. And then, I saw the piece that Fiona wrote, and I was like, oh my God, thank God there's other people like me. And so I joined the group. And again, that felt, it felt really nice to go on there to talk about symptoms that the CDC wasn't talking about. So I was having this weird vertigo, having these weird symptoms that nobody was confirming, that, neurological type symptoms that nobody was saying was COVID, but you're this is really weird what I'm having right now. And, I need some validation. So from a mental health perspective, again, it felt good to be validated that you're just not imagining these symptoms with the group. And then, I work I'm a technologist. I'm a designer, a strategist for tech development for the international development community. So I work with data and work with technology. So, what my first instinct was seeing people asking questions, and I was like, okay, we need to do this more systematically. So I was one of a few people that decided to create a survey. We whipped that up in a weekend, and we got everybody to give feedback on it. And it was a hit. Everybody wanted to respond to it. And then we had people wanting to help out, some really, really amazing researchers and analysts and doctors. And so now we have a little research team within the Body Politic Slack group, which, is really interesting. And to see that people are willing to put in, because it takes a lot of effort to do this work. And in addition to being sick, in addition to your job, it's really interesting to see how people are coming together to do this work. So that's my story with the support group.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you all. So there are practical questions I want to get into about how you run the group. But the thing that strikes me just from that is that the group sounds like it's both an important support group, and I'll ask more about that, but it's a learning group as well, almost a research group. And I know that people will watch this. Some people, like in the UK, for example, I have friends who are like, gosh, I'm still don't feel well. And this is 2 months later or more. And I know that some of them watch this, and I've sometimes posted your group to them, though they're, you know, in wherever, deepest, darkest, you know, English countryside or something. But I know that they'll really value hearing just your experience. Like, and I know it's a very complicated question, but what have you learned? What do you think is your group has learned that maybe is still not really properly reflected in the kind of the media information about this illness? And then I'm sorry if that's a big question. So, but I suppose it seems like one thing your group has really learned is it can last a long time, longer than one thinks.
I think from my perspective, one of the really valuable things that our group is, at least I've been seeing within the group, is the discussion of relapses, and the discussion of just how nonlinear and how much of a roller coaster this virus is. I still have not really been seeing that much in the news. I have been seeing more information about there being this long haul version of COVID, which is, you know, COVID lasting beyond 2 to 4 weeks, which really everyone, most of the admins most of the people within the group fall into that category. So from my perspective, I think it's been really fascinating to both kind of get an inside look into what those relapses look like for each person and which symptoms are kind of the biggest culprits for those relapses, you know, if it's neurological, if it's gastrointestinal, and to just kind of at least get a view of sort of the trends in that regard. It's been incredibly invaluable to me. And I think as, you know, for others out there who don't know that the support group exists and are just trying to find anything on the internet, and, you know, this information not being available on the internet has been really helpful, because it is, I mean, it really does take a patient to know a patient. And the media and science is obviously slow to catch up. Science and the media for very different reasons. But for me, just that sort of wealth of knowledge surrounding, I think the fact that relapses do occur, that they're common, I think is really helpful. And that's really important even when discussing, you know, the return of the economy and the return back to work, because employers need to understand that there is such a thing as relapses. And one day you might be perfectly fine or feel better, I should say. And then the next day you feel like you need to go to the ER. And to give an example, I'm just about on day 120 of symptoms. And I'm having a relapse this week because I walked a little extra this past weekend. And I had to take 3 days off of work this week because of that. So that sort of perspective is, I think, really, really valuable and rich within the community we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I recently wrote an article on this phenomenon because, again, I'm not seeing enough on it. And one of the things that I kind of discovered through that research, which had already come up in our group, is the relationship between what long haul patients are experiencing with COVID and what patients who have ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, have been experiencing. So that's something that's come out of the group, and we've linked up with a lot of different researchers and groups that have been studying ME/CFS. And there's, you know, a lot of people.
Which ME and chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yes, chronic fatigue syndrome. So a non-contagious post-viral it's usually a post-viral condition that causes you to feel, you know, fatigue on and off for quite a long time. And actually we have one of our admins, all of our admins with the exception of Lita are COVID patients. Lita was already on the team before, which is kind of why she had to step in while Sabrina and I were very sick, and she's done an amazing job. The one exception to this is one of our admins has not had COVID, but is someone who's been living with chronic fatigue syndrome for years. So she's been really helpful in terms of understanding how those lessons from kind of what she's learned might apply to patients in our group. And then the other takeaway I would say is there's been some national or global coverage of the fact that a lot of people are struggling to receive adequate care. But it tends to really, I think, simplify the issue. And the fact is that there are so many people in our group who go to the doctor with symptoms and either, you know, get told it's anxiety or aren't able to receive adequate care because they didn't have a positive COVID test early on because they weren't able to get tested. And a lot of this has to do with medical bias, and it tends to affect, you know, populations that are already marginalized. But it's also very widespread. I mean, I've seen white men in our group saying, I've never dealt with anything like this before, and I can't get anyone to take me seriously. So I think that's another important part of the puzzle, that it's a real struggle sometimes to access care for this virus.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think what's really interesting for the medical community is learning. You know, one of the things that I'm seeing is that, because doctors don't even know what tests to run. They might even believe you. Let's say they do believe you, and they're like, okay, you still have these symptoms, but like, we're not seeing, like how do I see it in your body? And we're seeing people basically tell their doctors what tests to run because they saw somebody in the Slack group, you know, test positive for something that's super bizarre, and like
Slack's the technology you use for the group.
Yeah. And so we have these different channels, and so it's really cool. I mean, I think we operationalize, and, you know, I call it the service design. And when you talk about technology, it's like we're bringing in like ways, you're setting up technology in ways that is, you know, servicing a community based on their needs, right? So we have these very specific channels based on, you know, the symptoms, based on length, based on, you know, maybe alternative healing, so different topics around that. But yeah, I mean, I think the learnings that we're getting from each other, we're passing it on to the medical community. Right. Because, you know, even if the scientific, like what I've learned as well is like the relationship between the scientific community and the medical community, there's like a disconnect. Like research will come out, but the medical community is like, takes them forever to see that research because it's like communicated in a way that's like not accessible to even to doctors. And so we're seeing the research, we're seeing each other. So we go to our doctor and we're like educating them. And sadly, because the medical community is like somewhat, I don't want to say egotistical, but like, I don't know what the word is, but it's like, you know, they're you know, they want to be right and they want to have the answer to stuff. So it's taking some humbling of the medical community. I'm seeing a little bit of that because they're learning from patients that are learning from each other. And this, I find it very powerful and potentially shifting the way, you know, medical care is happening. That's just, to me, it's fascinating.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add something on this point?
I just wanted to add that Allison has joined us, so when we have a chance, I would love to.
Hi, Allison.
Let her introduce herself, maybe question.
Let me just. Hi, Allison. Nice. Thank you for joining us.
Sorry I was late. I was actually just on a call with a lawyer who specializes in chronic pain advocacy, talking about like underrepresented groups and access issues.
Could you briefly introduce yourself? Just
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm Allison. I live in Colorado. I came to the group as a person with post-infectious ME/CFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome. 6 years ago, when I was 20 years old, I got mono, and it triggered ME/CFS for me, which I am disabled by now at this point. 6 years later, I participated in a huge study at the NIH that was looking at this and had just gotten home right before COVID hit. So I came to the group to offer my experience navigating issues of not being believed by doctors, not knowing what kind of care to access. A lot of the themes that we're seeing in the group I'm very familiar with in my experience. Everything is just happening at an accelerated pace right now.
Oh, thank you. Who is eligible to join the group? Is it a geographical thing, or can you tell me about that a bit? Who joins and how? Yeah.
It's open to people all over the world, and we have people from every continent at this point, more or less. It is open to anyone who is experiencing what they think might be COVID-19 symptoms, has survived the illness, is in recovery, or has tested positive. So you don't need to have tested positive to join the group, because we know there are a lot of testing reliability and accessibility issues, but anyone who thinks they are experiencing this illness is welcome to join, or thinks they have experienced it.
And how many
And
people,
further,
sorry.
sorry. To add further to that, also caretakers of loved ones who are experiencing. So, you know, parents who've got children that have been diagnosed, that as well. So just add on.
Thank you. And how many people are on the, are in the group?
I think the last count I saw was 6,000, around 6,000. I don't know if it might have grown in the days since then. We've actually had far more people sign up. And this is an issue we can get more into. I know at least over 10,000 people had signed up several weeks ago when I looked. You know, it's just a small team of volunteers onboarding people, and it's not an automated system. And we do ask them to sign up first so that we can just avoid, you know, trolls or people who have no relationship to the disease. So we're still kind of onboarding people every day. So I would say that number is pretty rapidly growing, but 6,000 people are active in the group currently, as far as I know.
Excellent, thank you. In terms of setting it up, some of the kind of mutual aid groups that have been set up during COVID were by people who probably are quite new to it, and perhaps it just started as a neighborhood group or a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group. But it sounds like you, well, there was Body Politic was already set up, and that you had experience of running it sounds like a kind of health advocacy group. And how helpful was that in terms of getting this up and running quickly?
Sure. So, I mean, it was very helpful, I would say, because we already had, you know, an Instagram platform with followers. We already had a website. We already had a team. That being said, our team has shifted and changed a lot in the past few months because people have relocated. People, you know, don't have the time to dedicate that they did before. And then there's also lots of new people who have joined, many of whom you're seeing on this call. So I would say that our specialties before we started this group was event programming, creating content around the intersections of wellness and social justice. We had not run an online community like this. And that was something that I think was, I mean, I had to learn how to use Slack basically before even launching the group, because I'm a gig economy person. I hadn't used it that much because it's usually kind of a corporate workplace thing. But yeah, the following that we already had definitely helped. It was a lot smaller than it is now. And I think just, you know, Sabrina, Lita, and I were very comfortable working together. And that was crucial because Sabrina and I got so sick so quickly, and Lita had to kind of step in and help in a really significant way. And I think we all had that communication, which was good. And we had a lens through which we knew that we wanted to approach this, I think even just implicitly, which was this lens of really trying to, you know, understand people's individual experiences, understanding that medicine and science don't always capture that diverse range of patient experience, and also being open to, you know, alternative methods of healthcare and healing, both in terms of mental health and physical health.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone want to add on that?
Just to add on. Yeah, just to add on to that, I think also Body Politic had a really big basis in storytelling and mutual support and just mental health as a piece of everything we do. So I think bringing that ethos into this group has been really important, and having channels within the group that really emphasize those aspects. Our symptom channels are very big and very important, but having mental health and positivity and need to event, and now our medical advocacy channels and other areas where people can really focus on storytelling and sharing their experience as a way, as a point of entry to the conversation. Something that we brought with us, I think, into this chapter of Body Politic, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah. I want to ask about how you think it's helped the people who've joined, particularly like emotionally. But first, I'd like to ask, how have you felt helped by it as the admins? You've mentioned that a little bit in your introduction, but I'd just like to, it's really the kind of thing we're particularly interested in. How has it supported your mental health and well-being through this? Or maybe, and maybe how has it been hard as well for your mental health and well-being? So both. And I mean, yeah, go for it, Lauren. Yeah.
I'll start off. So for me, for my own mental health, as I said before, I think for someone that has COVID, someone who's forced to isolate, especially in a small space in a city, don't really have anyone to talk to, that was important. So having that sort of human connection, where, obviously we're all physically social isolating, but I didn't have a family member to necessarily talk to because, fear of getting them sick. So that side of it was really valuable. What was also incredibly valuable from my perspective, and really helped with my mental health, was just essentially, that whole saying, misery loves company, that's not what I'm getting at per se, but seeing that other people were experiencing symptoms like me that were on the moderate to severe side and were managing at home. Though I didn't, it's sad, it is incredibly sad to see how many people are experiencing that. In a way, there is comfort from that because, you have someone that you can actually relate to. I'd say I was definitely battling some serious mental health issues kind of the first 2 months of my battle, because I would talk to friends, I would talk to doctors, as Gina talked about, I talked to family members, and whether they, they didn't mean it, but when they would say things like, oh, you're not better yet, or I know you're going to be better tomorrow, those kinds of things were really demoralizing and made me feel like I needed to either expedite my recovery, which, as we know, is not within our control, or to just lie and just to appease other people. So seeing that there was that validation that other people were having that same sort of, essentially people that I could talk to and kind of read their stories, I could relate to is huge. I think the other side of it, on the admin side of it, it's been really interesting because I've noticed that as being kind of an admin and moderating, I've kind of had just a different view of I think the concerns that people have. I've noticed, for instance, specifically, we have a channel called the Victories channel. It is specifically for happy events. And when someone within the group posts something that is a question or not related to victories, instantly everyone alerts us so that we can take charge and remove that situation. So it's been kind of interesting just to see the things that we're alerted to, kind of the trigger points for our group members. I almost said family members, but it does actually kind of feel like that, to be honest. So that's been it's been an interesting shift in that way. It's that we're able to kind of see from a higher level view, not just a patient view, but a higher level view, the trigger points, the mental health points for a lot of the group members, because they will alert us if there is something that's bothering them or if something is triggering for them, which is really important.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me was, there was points when I really didn't even want to tell my family or friends anymore because, it almost felt like I didn't want to hear their responses about it just, for some reason, whether it was like, they were trying their best, but it just felt like it was almost like, really, you're not better yet, and and that sort of thing. It felt like it just wasn't helpful, and I started to not share my symptoms or anything like that anymore. I even stopped going to doctors too, and I picked that up again because I was like, okay, now hopefully they saw enough media stuff where I don't have to explain it to them. And I saw doctors, the first month, and then I just stopped. I was like, I'd rather not have to deal with them, and I'm getting more answers in the Slack group anyways. So definitely helped from that perspective. And then from a, I think, there's there's some quote about this, I don't know what it is, but when you're, when you're sick or when you're suffering, the best, some of the best ways to feel better is to offer help yourself, right? And so I think being an admin, running the research, getting validation from others, affirmation, saying thank you so much, this helped me feel less alone. That that was helpful. That felt really nice to feel like, hey, I'm feeling crappy, but at least I've been helped by this group, and I'm helping others as well, and that felt really nice to be able to do that. People saying, hey, we took the report and we're taking the research to my doctor to prove that, hey, look, there's others like me. That felt like, hey, we're helping, and so that was validating to the work that we were doing, and so that was nice.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. So just related to mental health, and I think this is something that we've all touched on in bits and pieces for sure, but I have increasingly I think there's so many things to be said about how the world's continuing relationship with COVID has gone, and how media in different countries and different groups of people, like, you know, I think I was always hopeful that understanding would come more together. And I feel like in some ways it's become more disparate and politicized. And, you know, there's so many things that can be said about that. But I feel like often I'm navigating an alternate reality as someone who has had COVID, like just walking out into the world, seeing people not wearing masks, seeing people not social distancing, and just hearing the way even people in my life speak with still such limited understanding, and feeling like, you know, I would hope that they would get things a little bit more just by knowing me and by having read things that I've written, etc. So just signing into the group, even as an admin, even just to do administrative stuff on there, I feel like I'm entering into a reality that is more in tune with what I've experienced. I know I'm in a space where I don't have to explain to people that there are long haulers and that we're out here and there's quite a few of us. I feel like even when I'm going in there just to check channel requests and just to, you know, add people to groups, I already feel like I can breathe a sigh of relief that I'm in a space where I probably won't have to explain myself nearly as much as I do on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's just been very comforting, even when I'm not on there, just to know it exists and I can enter it when I need it. So yes, that is what I wanted to share. And then I have to go. I'm very sorry, everyone, but thank you so much, Jules. This has been really wonderful. And it was great seeing you all your lovely faces. Thank you. Bye.
I wanted to add something to the answers that everyone's given. I think the experience of being an admin has been really great overall because, like Gina, like Lauren, like other people who have talked, I've fallen out of touch with a lot of the friends that I usually socialize with. And that's in large part to do with the fact that they do not understand this experience on the intimate level that everyone else does. It's not that they are all unsupportive or anything like that, but listen, they're living their lives. They're not necessarily wanting to check in every day on how our symptoms going. And I think it's also really hard for people to understand how I have the energy, or, you know, now I'm mostly fully recovered, but how I had the energy to do all this stuff if I was still sick. But I think we all share this experience of just having this kind of rush of adrenaline or just like call to action, or maybe what Gina was talking about in terms of the desire to help others actually helping us heal, and we understand it. And so we're never questioning each other when someone needs a break, but we're also never questioning each other on like, how are you able to do this? That being said, everyone said lovely things about being an admin, and overall it's a very positive experience, but it is stressful. I mean, we're moderating thousands of people. I don't want to speak for everyone. I do not have experience moderating an enormous online support group before. It's been a lot of trial by fire. And there have been a handful of times that I have felt overwhelmed, where, you know, something happens in the group where there's, you know, a user who is not following our list of guides and norms, and we have to figure out what to do. And, you know, it's maybe during a very busy work day for many of us outside of the group. And it's hard to deal with all of that, especially when, you know, it's happening at 11 o'clock at night or midnight or 3 a.m. because they talk 24/7 because they're in all different time zones. So, you know, it's stressful. And the fact that we are all volunteers and most of us have other paid work that we have to do, you know, it is a burden. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. And I think we can speak more to like those specific issues, but overall, I'm so happy I met these people, and I would, you know, it's on balance just been an incredibly good experience. And I honestly feel like we will be in each other's lives for a long time. And we've never even met in person.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Would anybody else like to talk about that point?
I just want to quickly make the point that the model of like peer support group and navigating serious illness is not a new thing. I've been in many support groups that have been crucial in my accessing appropriate doctors, appropriate medical care. The reason I found the study that I was in is from a support group, which exponentially elevated my access of care. And the thing that's different about this, a lot of the challenges you see with peer support groups around serious illness is that usually no one is at the same stage at the same time. So that can be beneficial because you can have some people kind of mentor the newer folks through it. But because COVID hit, this has not been going on for decades, people are experiencing this all together. And so when I said earlier that we're seeing so many of the themes I've seen previously in support groups, we're seeing them at an accelerated rate because the sheer number of people experiencing this at the same time, it creates for a really unique and I think particularly effective model right now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Do you, in terms of your members, obviously I think a lot of what you said, they would say similar things about feeling similar stories that they can, and advice and support. Do you think that there are other things that we haven't mentioned so far that that your members get in terms of well-being support, mental health support, emotional support, as well as practical advice? But is there other things we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I think, the practical advice is certainly part of it. I think they also get kind of these options for outlets that I think can be helpful in the healing process. So some of these options include telling your story in the media, right? We get a lot of media requests. We don't allow reporters directly into the group. We filter all of them through a volunteer admin who has experience in PR and shares them with the group, and people have the opportunity to kind of, pick and choose which ones they want to do. GLAAD, which is an LGBTQ plus media advocacy organization, also offered our group members a free media training a couple of months ago. So, so for some people, that is a really, I think, powerful tool toward healing. It's been that way for me. And I know, Lauren's done a lot of media as well. So that's one option. Then I think for others, either participating in a survey as a respondent or, joining the research team and actually helping to create these surveys is another kind of, something to get your mind off of the disease, something to make you feel like you're involved and you're helping. And I can also speak to, before I did the survey that Gina and the patient research team had created, I had taken other surveys about my experience, but none of them understood what I was actually going through. And they all still had questions in them that made no sense. Like, when have you been fever free for 72 hours or something like that, with no concept of the idea that the fever could come back, or, placing everything on a positive COVID test and not allowing people to participate who didn't have that. So that's another option that I think a lot of people feel very satisfied seeing their experience reflected in this survey data and analyses. So those are two kind of routes that I've noticed. And another one is becoming an admin of the group. Like, we're always looking for new admins because it is a pretty big job. And we had, I think, 3 or 4 new people actually join our admin team just last week or 2 weeks ago. So I think there are actual activities that people can, participate in that help take your mind off it and help you feel like you are doing something helpful, which can be a good for the healing process and good for mental health.
Yeah, it's like a creative outlet. It's like a creative outlet for your sickness, right? Like, you're representing it in ways, and so that's somewhat healing, I think. As being an admin, I mean, creating the admin environment, like the Slack group and like, the channels and like thinking through that. It was all a creative process, I think. It was interesting seeing it reflected. It's like a piece of art, the whole Slack group. Cathartic. It's a piece of art, but a piece of art.
I do have to add to, going on to kind of what both Fiona and Gina were saying too. We also, it's not, so it is a mental health group, it's an emotional support group, but it also is interesting because it's a sharing of physical symptoms as well. And not that we're giving sort of advice, because that is what we do not want to do. We're not, medical practitioners, and that's not what our aim is. But what has been interesting, I think, also is on the physical side, there have been yoga classes set up for people suffering from COVID. I, for one, used to be incredibly active. I'm now almost on 4 months of this, and I tried to do yoga on my own before I found these sort of yoga specific or COVID specific yoga classes. So that's been really helpful too, because it's in a way physically also helping us. It's letting the kind of, when people choose to join those, it's helping us kind of get the blood flowing, which is really beneficial. It's also helping us to kind of test what we're physically able to do. So there's a little bit of a physical component too that's been really valuable, that has been as part of the group.
Thank you.
Yeah, and related to that, I think it's interesting to see how, we're benefiting from each other's skill sets. So like there's somebody that's a really good, like, they know how to find the best articles out there and then like dissect them, or like the medical journals. Some people are just good at, like, those are just really hard to decipher sometimes. And you'll see like somebody like just bringing out the gist of it, where like I wouldn't have been able to read the medical journal, and really like that would take me a long time, And I love that. I go into some of these, these channels, and people are like, oh, wow, look at this. 40% of the people tested negative, blah, blah, and but they, so you're like, wow, it would have taken me like a whole week to figure this out. But you just did something amazing.
Yeah.
And so people are offering their skill sets in ways to each other that, like, whether it's like the yoga class, or whether it's like somebody reading a journal, or like, deciphering these videos, or like, we're not giving like advice that's like, so this is the part that's like, yeah, it's like a fine line between like giving you medical advice, but like, it's almost like we're channeling some of the things that are out there in ways that, whether it's our experiences or whether it's our expertise in areas that might help you, that's really, healing and providing some relief. And
Thank you.
I feel like we should at least mention that we do have these Slack AMA Ask Me Anything sessions where medical professionals and people who are experts in a field related to COVID can come on, and people can ask them questions. And it's like an hour at a time, and those seem to be very popular. So I think that's an important thing. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes people share articles in other languages or studies from other countries, and they actually translate or, summarize the findings.
Thank you. So I was, when I had a kind of mental health, I guess, issues in my early 20s, and I was part of a support group then, and it was on the whole very helpful. But I also had a sense that there are sometimes when a membership in a health support group or a mental health support group can not be helpful in some ways. Do you have a feeling of that? And which have you noticed that? And how do you kind of work with that, or try to mitigate those ways it can be not so helpful sometimes?
I think the ways that, and I have noticed that, I'd say, because a lot of us are long haulers, a lot of us are kind of constantly in it, because we're like, all right, I have this today, are you experiencing this? Or just people kind of not lurking, but just checking the channels and not posting. But, oh God, and I just forgot what I was going to say. Welcome to COVID brain. Go to someone else. Sorry. Oh, it'll come back to me.
All right, sure.
I could jump in here. I think that one really excellent feature of Slack is that the notification settings are really customizable. So I've been a participant in support groups and in private Facebook groups, WhatsApp, text chains, like lots of different things in my years of being sick. And I think having the ability to view specific channels, turn off notifications for other channels in this group, if you are being overwhelmed by reading about potential symptoms or things that could happen as this disease state develops, you don't have to step back from the support group entirely if you're feeling overwhelmed. You could choose to only look at the Victories channel, which a lot of people do, or they ebb and flow through doing that. And so I think the Slack in particular is excellent for dealing with this specific problem.
Right.
Sometimes things will happen where someone will post about what they're experiencing, and the person posting is clearly in a crisis moment, basically, usually a mental health crisis moment.
Right.
And I would say 99% of the time, from what I see, and maybe you guys would agree, people jump in really quickly with like really helpful advice. We also shared a list of mental health resources in one of the kind of general channels, and are encouraging people to repost that. They see people who seem to, maybe have suicidal ideation or be experiencing a panic attack or something really intense. Every once in a while, two people like that find each other, and they will have a conversation that, you know, gets a little dark and maybe is not, I think, necessarily helpful, before others step in and kind of say, hey, you guys are going to survive. You're going to be okay. Like, we're here, you know, you feel free to complain to us, you know, but also it would be great to maybe seek out some mental health support. Here's some therapists. Here's this, right? So there, I think, again, that's the risk, is that can happen. I don't see it happening a whole lot, though, I have to say. And I think that the group grew quickly, but it grew incrementally. So I think a real culture was created in the group that people join, and they kind of see really quickly how to interact with one another and how to help each other. And it is a culture of really respecting people's boundaries. And it's also a culture of really trying to help one another, and not step, you know, over those boundaries of providing unsolicited mental health advice, or, you know, saying you have to take this herb or this supplement or whatever. So yeah, I think we've avoided that in large part. And I actually asked the admins this question a couple of months ago, because there was maybe one instance of this. And I said, have you guys seen this elsewhere? Do we think this is a problem? Do we think in any way that people's bad feelings are fueling each other? But, you know, everyone kind of said, no, I don't think it's a universal thing. So I think it's something that doesn't come up very often and usually gets nipped in the bud when it does. And people also will just tag us when something is getting a little bit out of hand. And usually one of us is online and can jump right in.
Right. Yeah. Got you.
And further to that, so the brain fog kind of went away for a moment. So the other side of it too, so your question was, you know, if it becomes kind of too much for people, what they do. So as Allison said, they do have the option. It's kind of the beauty of like a group on Slack versus like Facebook, where you're just inundated. There's no channels, no organization. You can't, you know, mute something if you don't want to hear it. But what I have seen, so when I have seen people saying that they feel, you know, overwhelmed, that they might take a break from the group, that does happen, and people do that. And I think it's not so much, I don't think necessarily it's the content of the group. I think it's more that they want to take a break from just being connected, from being online. So the majority of the posts I've seen where people have said, you know, I got to go away for a little bit, it has never been, I think, because of things that have been said within the group per se. It's always been more that they need just their own kind of self-care time, just to not be connected to the internet, and to kind of go inward in ways.
Got you. Yeah. Thank you. I've got two more questions because I'm conscious I've taken up lots of your time. But then maybe not the easiest questions. The first is, if you could pass on one bit of advice to somebody who's set up a mutual aid group, what would it be?
I'll go first. So I think what I would say to someone that's setting up a group like this would be that there has to be a sort of vetting process in a way in place. You can't just make it free for all, because I think the most important part of any emotional support or any support group period is that you have to have people that, one, aren't trolls, and that respect the fact that it's a safe space. Because the only way that these groups can work and the only way that people can benefit from them is if the members are all kind of of the same mindset and treating each other respectfully. So I'd say probably the most important part, at least from my perspective, is really ensuring that the people that you let into the group uphold that need for a safe space. And that can be really hard because you don't know them. I mean, it's just someone submitting requests to access via a form online. And there's a little bit of just sort of blind trust that we have in, okay, this person legitimately has a need to access this group. And obviously there's thousands of people. We can't monitor every single person. But yeah, I think that ensuring that you really have sort of protocols set up to make it continue to be a safe, judgment-free place is really important and kind of basic, but it needs to be said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just to clarify, the way that works is we have people sign up for the group via a Google form that just asks basically for your name, your email, and why you want to join the group. And that question of why you want to join the group is pretty important because we have had people say in that answer, oh, I don't have COVID, but I'm just curious about what people are dealing with. Or I'm a reporter from the New York Times who wants to write about people with COVID. And those two answers that I just mentioned are answers that you would not be let into the group. Someone would probably reach out to you and either say, to the first one, sign up for our newsletter. We send out a twice monthly update on, some of the biggest trends we're seeing in the group. And for the second, we basically allow media inquiries to go through the admins, and we then, bring them into the group. So I think that's key. I also think that in that same vein, you have to be willing to, I don't know how to put this, but there are other COVID-19 support groups on other platforms that have even more members than we do, but they do not have the same kind of constant flow of conversation. And they also are not organized in the same way, where people can join these little subsets of communities based on either, demographics or what they're experiencing. So we have, channels for every system of the body. We have channels for the biggest issues that have come up. We have this channel called Victories. So I think, that is something that sets this group apart. And I think that in that same vein, it's very easy to kind of get sucked into, oh my gosh, we could get so many members and let's see how many people we could get. But it's much more important to have members who are actually invested in the group, have experienced the virus themselves, and really understand the norms of behavior, because I think that's what makes people feel safe in the group. The last thing I'll say is I think it's really important for the group admins to meet and develop their own culture. We have our own private channel in the Slack where we talk, but we also have semi-regular video calls with either some of us or all of us. And I think that's really key, because when you're working in an online support group, it's very easy for everyone to just kind of be at their own computer, but we make decisions collectively a lot, especially when it's a very, intense situation, or we have someone in the group who is, not abiding by the norms of the group. We always make those decisions collectively, and it helps that we know who each other are on a base level. We've seen each other's faces. We have that sense of kind of respect for one another and respect for one another's opinions.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone like to add something, or I'll ask my last question? Well, my last question is, I think a lot of people are thinking about how to sustain the spirit of mutual aid that has blossomed. What do you think about that? Do you have plans for your group, or perhaps more generally, how do you think governments and funders could best support these groups, or should they leave them alone to do what they do beautifully without interfering too much? So the first thing is, do you have plans particularly for this group, or how do you think of it in the future? And the second is, how do you think the spirit of mutual aid can best be supported, by governments and funders and people in general?
I think I have many thoughts on that. And I think it's important to say that I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who's been running a group, because Body Politic was also something before this, has been running something that has never received outside funding, has always been powered by volunteers. And so that is the perspective I'm coming from. I'm not coming from the perspective of someone who's dealt with outside investors. And I know that there are a lot of issues with that. And I'm sure if I was coming from that perspective, I might say something different. But I'm coming from the perspective of being very overwhelmed and very tired, and seeing that also, I think, unfortunately, you're right. There is this adrenaline and there is this desire to help, and it fuels your work for a certain amount of time. But after that point, it's easy to feel kind of exhausted or burnt out, or even just less excited about the project. So I think for this group to continue, we will need to get some sort of outside funding. And I think also, especially because you want a diverse team leading this group. And, the people we have on this call, we have because they were kind of the first people to join our admin team. But I also think, our admin team is definitely not as diverse as it needs to be and should be in terms of representing the people that are in our group, both racially and in terms of, class backgrounds. And I think that you're not going to be able to have people, volunteer work is not equally accessible to everyone, right? So I did this work for months, very intensely, because I lost a bunch of jobs and I had savings, and I was able to kind of just live off my savings for a little while, and I had a discount on rent. But eventually I had to get a new job, and I started a new job 2 weeks ago, and I've been a lot busier and I'm still figuring out how to work in the group. So that's my perspective. That being said, talk to me, in 5 years if this gets funded, and maybe I'll have something different to say. Regarding expansion opportunities and kind of how to keep the group going, I think that we all realize that, something needs to probably change in order for us to adequately care for or provide support and care to all of the people who are going to need this group in the next few months and next year, right? Because we're seeing infection rates, especially in the US, are only going up. It's certainly the same in South and Central America and, the Middle East and Africa. So, I think, we're thinking about a lot of different things. And one thing we're also really seriously considering and thinking about is how can we make this Slack group more accessible? Slack is usually used in corporate spaces. I had a conversation with my mother the other day. She was trying to join a Slack mutual aid group, something different. And she's like, I have no idea how to use this. And she's generally pretty good with technology. So I'm thinking, why is this? Well, it's because she's never worked in a white collar corporate office, right? So I think that, we're thinking about also, is there some way to develop our own platform or our own technology, or some way that we could work with Slack to develop, things that are more in line with the needs of our group. So these are all kind of questions we're grappling with. And I think we're hoping to figure this stuff out in the next coming months so that we can hopefully continue to provide support down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that. I mean, I think, just like any, I've done research on open source communities in the tech world, for example. There's and I see some analogies with that. I mean, I think there's some level of, volunteer work that can happen, but in general, to make this sustainable, there needs to be some level of funding coming in, whether it's you're self-sustainable and you're able to figure out ways to monetize something, to pay for people to work, or some other funder with aligned vision can work with you to fund you to continue the effort, because it's like for collective good and something that our governments should provide for us, but that's not happening, right? So I think it's probably going to be, I see it like a potentially, it's going to be a combination of both, where there's going to be a little bit of volunteers that may not get funded, but then to sustain this and to make this really a little bit more powerful, more, long term, there's going to have to be some level of, some funding coming in, hopefully.
I think to what Gina said too, because I mean, Slack is expensive, and making our own platform's incredibly expensive, and both in terms of time, I don't know if we can afford, we could have, a Slack channel going while there's development for a separate system going. But funding is something I think we're definitely gonna need at some point. Slack has been kind and has seen our need and has kind of extended a free trial, if you will, to one of their more advanced plans. Unfortunately, if we don't have funding and, they're not willing to continue these extensions that they've been so kind to give, that means that we're going to go down to what's, their basic free plan. And that actually limits how many people are in the group. There's a limit. I think it's to either 5,000 or less people. And that's obviously not a big number when we're talking, COVID scale. So at some point, I really do think there is going to be absolutely a need for funding. And I think that what's most important, I think probably the hardest part, because I do come from a background of working with different funding streams on the government side. And I think the hardest part is finding an investor or someone who wants to support in that way monetarily, who really understands the culture and the mission of what we're doing. Ideally, that would be someone that had COVID. I mean, truly. How great would it be if Tom Hanks, could be, hey, I wish I had this when I had my struggle, and here you go, I understand COVID, I'm not going to change your culture. But as we know, that doesn't really, it's not as simple as that. What I foresee as being some hurdles that way is I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us to collaborate with research, potentially, on the mental health space and beyond, obviously, as it relates to COVID. But I think the hard part about that in particular is just that a lot of these separate groups have their own agendas. And that's something that I really think it's going to be, it's just a tricky thing, because we have to make sure that whoever and if ever we're able to get funding, that they align with our mission, and really want to continue it being a safe space for our members. We don't want it to be something where, there's a data mining thing that's going on where it's just personal information being taken. That's something that we do not want to happen within this group. Surveys are one thing, but if we were to get funding from, let's say, an agency that wanted to do that, wanted to just essentially glean information from all of the thousands and thousands of posts, that would be a huge invasion of privacy. So there's just some concerns with that where, you want the funding, but you also really need to be selective in who actually is able to kind of work with you and collaborate that way.
Yeah, thank you.
And just to be clear, all of the surveys that the patient research team is working on, they're all opt-in. So, that's very important to us to maintain that. And I also think that's another thing that's unique about this platform is it's emotional support with an opt-in, opportunity to participate in research. And I'll also just say to that extent that some of the things we're doing, both with research and honestly, we receive, I'm not exaggerating, dozens of media inquiries every day. We've had so much press about this group and we have not reached out to one outlet. Like, it has all come to us. That is a full-time job. So there are other huge expenses that we're dealing with in terms of just, it would be really great to have a PR agency that's able to field some of these inquiries, right? It would also be really great to be able to pay for some of the technology that would make this research easier. So I think, we're seeing that need emerge.
And just finally, have you thought about a kind of member payment model?
Yes, we have thought about that. The thing that we've always said is we just feel like it's really important that membership to this community not be tied to a monetary investment, because the group, again, I think it's already limited in terms of who can access it to some degree, just because you need to have the technology to run Slack. In many cases, I think you need a familiarity with Slack, although we have a detailed onboarding guide and many people join who haven't used it. But
perhaps some, you're absolutely right. A membership is the wrong way to think about it, but perhaps some kind of crowdfunding within your community and for other people as well who just support it, investing in the future when they might have COVID.
No, definitely. You're totally right. And we actually do have a GoFundMe to help cover some of the operational costs of just the website and the email and, hopefully compensate some of our admins. And that has raised, I think at this point, maybe close to $7,000. And a lot of that is due to people in the group sharing it, within their community and we've posted it in the group and just said, if there's anything you can donate or if there's anyone but I'm also aware kind of from looking at the crowdfunding thing, even before we started this group, that is also a job in and of itself, building and running a really successful campaign like that. But you're absolutely right. And that's something I think we're going to be thinking more about in the coming weeks.
And I think to add on to what Fiona said, so that's something that has absolutely been on our minds. And I think to Fiona's point too, a lot of people in the group, we're all COVID patients. So we all have medical bills, and to have medical bills and then, also pay for a support group, it would just be a tall ask. It would be very, it could be burdensome for a lot of people. What we have done recently, and I think this is just a beautiful thing, it's just a form of the solidarity that we kind of have as long haulers. One of our admins came up with a t-shirt campaign that we just posted, and those funds, so the people who paid for it, and they're going to get the t-shirt, and it's literally Body Politic on the back and then COVID long hauler on the front, just to kind of show that support. And the funds for that, I think, are also going to go back into the group. So whether that's paying for things like a polling app or whatever, however it's going to be used, we have been doing that. So there have been kind of some fun ways that we could do it. It's all completely optional, but yeah, a mandatory payment would be probably very difficult, because we really want this to remain inclusive.
Totally. I think that's not a good idea. Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you so much, and I'm so impressed. You coping with the illness, you've done more, than I do in a good year. So it's so helpful. So I'm very just appreciative of your work. I really am. And is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have, or anything that you want to talk about that I didn't cover that you think should be included in this conversation?
I think the only thing I would mention is that we do have this onboarding guide, which kind of lays out our norms and guidelines. And I created that when we first created the group, but it's a living document that we continue to add to. And we've also created other guides that are internal for admins, including, you know, a step-by-step guide to how to deal with a conflict in the group, so that these things kind of live, you know, in our Google Drive, and we can access them when we need to. And we all keep track of, we each take shifts in the Slack. So every day there are 2 people that go into the Slack group and are online at 2 separate points in the day. We track those shifts in a Excel grid. We write notes from each shift so that when you go in for your next shift, you can see if anything happened before. So they're, you know, these are just little technical systems, but they've been very helpful for us. And I think it's really crucial to have those guides and norms and guidelines, because people do follow them, and it also gives you something to call upon when you see behavior that you know is inappropriate, but you maybe need to explain why.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
It was
very
really
much.
great talking with you.
Likewise.